Like Firat, my writing began in exile, but it was not voluntary exile. My family and I were in forced exile that millions of Palestinians continue to suffer from today. My father experienced the Nakba as a child and became a political activist. Thus, in 1970, he found himself in exile in Lebanon with my late mother. In 1983, I lost my mother to the war with Israel. We were broken and battered after Beirut, and our exile continued in Cyprus. As a child, I was an avid reader, and my father encouraged this habit. When he visited Arab countries, he brought back stacks of books and cassettes of music and plays. It was very important for him that his children did not lose their language. Thus, while I studied English and French and picked up Greek from my surroundings in Cyprus, my Arabic continued to be strong, and I very much identified with our culture and traditions. Arabic is a beautiful, poetic, poignant language that offers a myriad of expression which sometimes exceeds that of English. As a child, I compiled a little magazine in Arabic that I got my parents and brother to subscribe to. I wrote 2 issues of it, and my father kept them until today. I loved not just the language, but the window into our culture that it gave me, the belonging that we were so thirsty for, stateless and without a home, like all the people of the world. We did not imagine that we would ever go back to our country. I read the works of Palestinian writers such as Ghassan Kanafani, Mahmoud Darwish, and Samih al-Qasim, and I listened to our songs of pain and longing. I took part in demonstrations for Palestine that were organized in Cyprus. I wore our kufi and I drew our flag on my school books. Palestine was something we dreamed about, but we did not have a concrete picture of a place that we could go back to. Then in 1994, our exile ended abruptly and unexpectedly, for us at least. After the Oslo Accords, we were among a very small number of Palestinians who could return to their village inside Israel. I was 22 years old, and it was the biggest shock of my life. Coming back to Israel was something I could not possibly be prepared for, and I struggled deeply after I got here. I searched for Palestine but could not find it. I felt an alien presence and jarring occupation in every step I took. At this time, I began to write a diary in which I journaled my thoughts. I was overwhelmed and lost. And in writing, I tried to find a refuge and to make sense of my world, but it was not to be, and 8 years later, I left to Canada. There, my writing began. It was when I found myself again in a situation of exile that my longing for my homeland erupted once more, and I started trying to come to terms with my return and the years that I had lived there. The writing did not happen by a conscious choice. One day, I was sitting in my apartment, cold and lonely with the snow outside, and I took a pen and paper and wrote a short story. I surprised myself because it was about people in my village, the very place I had run away from, saddened and alienated. I wrote more stories. Some were funny, some were sad, and most of them shone the light on this segment of people that face poverty and discrimination in their daily lives in the state, and yet go on living and fighting for their bread and dignity. The stories began to be published in Arabic newspapers. In 2009, I resolved the conflict of being so homesick and came back, this time to Ramallah. Here I was to see the occupation for the first time, to live on the other side, which is essentially the other face of the same coin, the coin of being repressed in this state as Palestinians, whether in Israel or in the territory, just in different ways. Here my writing went deeper. I began to look at the suffering of people around me, at a horrendous, soul-crushing political reality, at people crossing checkpoints and facing fear and death each day, and at hardship in everything from work to education to health to no peace of mind, no matter how hard we try. I published 3 collections of short stories and took part in an anthology on 50 years of the occupation. Now, I'm writing my memoir, telling the story of my family and the story of Palestine in one. Listening to Firat, the similarities abound. In recent years, the Arabic language has also come under attack in Israel through the proposed nation-state law, which gave inferior standing to Arab citizens and against which there was a huge outcry. There have also been attempts to downgrade Arabic from the status of an official language, though a fifth of Israel's citizens are Palestinians. Just under half of Jewish Israelis are Mizrahim. They originate from Arab countries such as Iraq, Yemen, and Morocco. Their songs, food, and culture still reflect this. Yet the state has the same attitude towards Arabic as it has towards the Arabs, treating it as an inferior enemy language. Very few Israelis speak or understand Arabic, and many do so only for the purpose of working in the intelligence services or such. The Palestinians may be a minority in Israel. In fact, they were forced to become a minority after most of them were expelled from their country during the Nakba. But Arabic is certainly not a minority language. It is spoken by about 400 million people in 22 countries. I do not see myself as a minority in my country. Rather, I see the unfair situation that exists in which a demographic balance is forced by not allowing Palestinian refugees to return to their homes. My writing often reflects my anger at the injustice, the callousness, and the refusal to acknowledge the wrongs or right them by the Israeli establishment and by the people at large. Writing for me has taken on many functions beyond the usual reasons for which people write. Like many other works, it expresses pain and frustration. It provides an outlet through which we can cry out, we can document, and we can persevere. It also gives us other channels to cope with the pain, especially using dark humor or satire. Living in Israel for a Palestinian is an exercise in surrealism every day. The state has woven such an intricate web of discrimination, fear-mongering, and repression against us that one wonders at the ingenuity with which this has been done. It is tragic, I always think, how far this effort could go in achieving peace and harmony if it was channeled in that direction. But my writing has also been a bridge between my two people. The separation wall that Israel has built between it and the Palestinian territory did not just sever Israelis from Palestinians living there. It also severed Palestinians on both sides of the wall, those who are Israeli citizens and those who are not, from each other. To me, traversing and living on both sides, it is heartbreaking how far this has fragmented an already scattered people, scattered in Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, the Arab countries, the West, scattered even further into those who live in the refugee camps and those who do not, scattered by the color and nature of their IDs and passports, if they have them. To have this divide inside our homeland is one of the most painful of all. Thus, I write about one audience for the other. I take my stories back and forth across the divide. There is happiness and the shock of recognition on people's faces as they realize the similarities, the uniformity of a people that perseveres despite insurmountable obstacles. There is also a bringing closer, a breaking down of misconceptions, and a reminder that we are one people who have been forced through war to live in different realities. Perhaps the dissimilarity with the Kurdish context is that we have always had a broad base of publication, one that spans the entire Arab world. Palestinian works were published in various Arab countries, as many of our writers were born into exile, and many of those who were here faced publication restrictions. In Israel, for several decades after the Nakba, the situation was in fact similar to the Kurdish case. When my father wrote his book, The Arabs in Israel, in 1966, he could not find a single publisher in Israel that would agree to publish it. He printed the book by himself at a Palestinian printer in Haifa and found one left-wing Jewish distributor who agreed to distribute it in Israel. Years later, the book became a reference on the Palestinians in Israel and was taught in several university curricula and translated to many languages. Similarly, the poetry of Darwish and Qasim that I later read as a teenager was grounds for their arrest and intimidation when they lived in Israel. Darwish left the country for this reason, among others. Today, the situation is different. We are able to express ourselves in writing to a large degree. In the political sphere, the voices of Arab members of parliament were often silenced, and everyday people were still afraid to voice their anger and frustration. But this has been changing. Young people are becoming more vocal, coming out of the legacy of fear that their parents lived under. Political representatives have grown bolder. We are speaking out about racism, even as the country spirals deeper and deeper into its ugly cycle. And in literature, too, Palestinians inside Israel have been breaking their chains. We have long been shunned by both Israel and the Arab countries, which in turn related to us as traitors and stuck these labels on us because we had Israeli citizenship. Slowly, we are making our case that we are those who managed to stay on their land, that we represent a fraction, however small, of the Palestinians who were ousted with the first disaster, the Nakba. In literature, many young voices are moving forth to take our rightful place, to tell the story to fellow Arabs as well as to Israelis, to raise a voice that has long been repressed. My own writing has reflected my life. It crosses many divides across various countries: Lebanon, Cyprus, England, Canada, and Israel, Palestine. From each of these, I have internalized concepts and experiences that feed who I am. For a long time, I battled with immense personal frustration in trying to answer this question: who am I? I carried my refugee status everywhere I went. I was exhausted with all the moving around, wanting to have a normal country to settle in, like the natural right of any human being. But finally, it dawned on me that I embody the Palestinian case of exile and wandering. The Jewish people suffered from this for a long time, and it is tragic that the Palestinians have had to endure the same cup. Out of this realization was born my feeling that I am a mix of all these places, of all the friends I've made and the talks I've had, of all the moments of pain and fear that have shaped my world. My writing is simply an honest portrayal of this sense of confusion and reckoning, this life path that has spelled Palestine and breathed Palestine and been caused by Palestine wherever I have gone. Finally, I am back home, but I'm still a collection of pieces of all these lives. There are many moments in which I still feel alienated here by the anger, the injustice, the daily pain and suffering of millions of people. My alienation is strongest in Israel. I'm trying to work against it by writing and reaching out, and I'm gladdened when I get the chance to do so. Next year, a book will come out of my short stories, translated from Arabic to Hebrew for the first time. I see it as a bridge that may help to make a dent in the alienation, and I'm glad for the opportunity to have my story heard by Hebrew readers. Most of all, I refuse to be labeled as a minority or to be treated as such. I do not see myself as a minority, but as part of a thriving people that continue to weave their lives in conditions that would make many others give up in despair. My people, like my language, are proud, persevering, and beautiful. They are deserving of long-awaited justice to stop their pain. And until then, we continue to write, sing, draw, paint, make music, and do whatever it takes to make our voice heard. Thank you.